They say childhood defines you, but what they don't say is that sometimes it defines you wrong. Somewhere, in a classroom or at a dinner table, a child is told, "You're always the trouble. You never listen. You just want attention," and it sticks. Not because it's true, but because it's repeated. First, you fight it. You try to be good, to prove them wrong. But no matter what you do, you end up being blamed again. So eventually, you stop trying to be understood, and you start trying to survive being misunderstood. That's the birth of the problem child. Not in what they do, but in how the world decides to see them. Psychologists call it labeling theory, the idea that the names people give you become the cage you live in. A label repeated enough times becomes identity. A child called lazy begins to believe effort is pointless. A child called dramatic learns to hide their feelings. A child called selfish grows into someone who gives too much, afraid of being that word again. And when you're called the problem, you begin to feel like love itself is something you have to earn. That's where the real damage begins, not in the behavior, but in the belief. Because children don't know how to separate what they do from who they are. If something you did made them angry, you start believing you are the reason they're angry. So you carry that guilt everywhere. Into every friendship, every relationship, every silence that feels like punishment. But here's the thing about the so-called problem child. They were never truly the problem. They were the mirror. They reflected what the family or system didn't want to see. They exposed the discomfort everyone else buried. They felt what no one else dared to say. And in homes that fear emotion, sensitivity looks like disobedience. Curiosity looks like defiance. And self-expression looks like threat. So they punish what they don't understand. And the child learns that authenticity is dangerous. That honesty breaks peace. That silence keeps love. And from that point on, survival replaces selfhood. As they grow older, this conditioning follows them like a ghost. They become hyper-aware, reading every tone, every expression, every pause. They learn to sense tension before words are spoken. They anticipate moods like weather. Because when you grow up being blamed, your nervous system stays alert, always watching, always adjusting. You become what psychologists call hypervigilant, constantly scanning for signs of danger, rejection, or disappointment. It's exhausting, but to the problem child, it feels normal. They often grow into adults who overthink before they speak, apologize before they're even wrong, and feel guilty for existing too loudly. They become caretakers, perfectionists, or peacemakers, the ones who fix others, even when they're breaking inside. Because somewhere in their mind, love and approval are still tied to performance. Let's go even deeper. When you're treated as a problem, you start to fear freedom. Because freedom means unpredictability, and unpredictability once meant pain. So even when you grow up, you keep recreating control. You choose relationships where you're needed, not loved. You stay in jobs where you're overworked but validated. You surround yourself with chaos because calm feels foreign. You mistake anxiety for passion and instability for connection. They have the rare ability to sit with pain because they've lived it. What others call overthinking is often just a mind that's learned to analyze every detail for danger. What others call too emotional is just a heart that never got permission to feel safely. And what others call rebellious is often someone's first attempt at autonomy, at being their own person in a world that never let them be one. So maybe the problem was never in them. Maybe it was in a culture that punishes authenticity and worships obedience. Let's talk about how that child grows up. Sometimes they become the quiet ones, the adults who avoid conflict at all costs. They shut down their voice because they learned early that speaking up only leads to trouble. They smile, nod, agree, even when their soul disagrees completely. Others go the opposite way, they rebel harder. They fight, argue, and self-destruct because they were never allowed to express anger safely. They don't know how to process it, only how to explode with it. Both are trauma responses, two ends of the same unloved spectrum. Silence or chaos, suppression or explosion, all born from the same wound, not being heard. And here's something rarely discussed. Sometimes, the problem child grows into someone who feels like a burden even when no one says it, especially if they're financially dependent or not where they hope to be in life. Even if their family never made them feel small, the old narrative still whispers, "You should be doing more. You're falling behind. You're disappointing them again." That's the internalized voice of childhood shame. It tells you that your worth is tied to your usefulness, that you have to earn space in people's lives. But that voice is lying. It's the echo of old pain pretending to be logic. And the moment you start questioning it, truly questioning it, you begin to heal. Healing the problem child isn't about erasing the past. It's about learning to reparent yourself, to give yourself what no one gave you, understanding instead of blame, patience instead of punishment. You start by noticing how often you shrink to stay safe. How often you say, "I'm fine," when you're not. How often you carry guilt that doesn't belong to you. And when you start unlearning that, something incredible happens. You begin to rebuild your identity. You realize your worth isn't conditional. You realize you don't have to earn rest, love, or kindness. You realize that peace doesn't mean danger anymore. It means healing. Psychologically, this process is called self-reconstruction. It's when you separate who you truly are from who you were told you were. When you stop asking, "Why am I like this?" and start asking, "Who taught me to fear myself?" you begin to see that your anger wasn't evil, it was communication. Your sadness wasn't weakness, it was sensitivity. Your rebellion wasn't defiance, it was your spirit refusing to die. And slowly you stop fighting yourself. You begin forgiving the child who was punished for feeling too deeply. You forgive the adult who still overcompensates for that wound. You stop needing to prove that you're not a problem anymore, because you finally see you never were. But let's be honest, healing isn't linear. There are days you'll still hear that old voice, the one that says, "Don't mess up. Don't be too much. Don't draw attention." There are moments when you'll overthink every word, when silence will still feel heavy, when love will feel like a test. And in those moments, remember this, you're not backsliding, you're remembering. Your body is revisiting the blueprint it was given. But now you have awareness, and awareness changes everything. Because this time, when someone calls you difficult, you won't shrink. You'll understand that difficulty is often the name given to people who won't betray themselves. There's something beautiful about people who were once labeled the problem. They grow into adults who carry both fire and gentleness. They know the weight of being misunderstood, so they try not to misunderstand others. They know what it's like to crave safety, so they become that safety for someone else. And that's their quiet power. The world may have tried to silence them, but they learned to turn silence into strength. They built empathy out of rejection, wisdom out of pain, and peace out of the ashes of chaos. That's not weakness. That's transformation. You see, society loves labels because they make life simpler. It's easier to call a child a problem than to admit our systems are flawed. It's easier to label than to listen. But every label hides a story, and every story deserves to be heard. Because when you call someone a problem, you stop being curious about their pain. And the moment curiosity dies, so does compassion. So maybe the real rebellion isn't being perfect. Maybe it's being real. Maybe it's finally saying, "I am not the names they gave me. I am not the mistakes I made while trying to survive." Maybe being the problem child means you were just the one who refused to go numb. So here's the truth. You were never too much. You were simply placed in an environment that could handle too little. You were not broken, just shaped by hands that didn't know how to hold you. And you were not the problem. You were the awakening that others weren't ready for. And if you're still carrying that old label, you can put it down now. You don't owe anyone your silence. You don't owe anyone your smallness. You don't have to keep performing peace to be loved. You are allowed to be exactly as you are: loud, soft, angry, loving, complex, real. Because none of that makes you a problem. It makes you human. And that, in itself, is your redemption.